Um, I'm going to share my screen. Hello, everyone. My name is Xi. Thank you for having me. I am a data analyst working for a local hospital in Irvine. So I'm very honored to present these two chapters, and hopefully we can learn from each other. Before we get started, I would like to say these two chapters are more like advanced topics. So if you don't understand everything, it's okay. Don't get upset. The purpose for these two chapters, I think, is to introduce the ideas to us so that in the future, if we do have come across some difficult problems, that we will know there are some tools in SQL that we can use to accomplish them. So feel free to interrupt me at any time if you are not understanding me. Then let's get started. So the first lesson, lesson 18, is using views. What are views? They are virtual tables. So they don't contain any data. They are not like the normal tables we see. Then why do we use views instead of tables? I have used views in my work, so I will speak from my experience. So the one scenario I can think of when you want to use views instead of tables is that the data is changing all the time. So for example, I work for a hospital. We must monitoring our daily census, which is the how many people or how many patients are actually in-house every day. So this data is changing every time. Instead of giving people a table to use when they don't know when the data get updated, you can share a view with people. So every time when they execute the views, they know that the data they get is the most updated. So that's one scenario you want to use views instead of tables. Another scenario is let's make that example again using daily census. So a lot of departments inside of hospital, they are using daily census as part of their reporting. So if they want to use this part of the data a lot of the time, then you want to share and reuse the SQL statements so that they can execute the views and get the data, and they don't need to worry about the SQL query inside of the views. So that's the benefit of using views. You can reuse SQL statements. So other departments, they don't need to understand the logic inside. They just need to, what they do is to execute the views. So the views are very useful. Just two more things to remember before you get to use it. Is one, the view gets the data gets changed every time when you execute the view. And another thing is because the view is referencing all the tables inside of it. So if the tables inside of the views get changed, then your return of the view will get changed. So any question so far?
I have a question.
Oh, yes.
So I'm sorry that I didn't read the textbook, but based on your explanations, very easy to understand. Is that the view considered to be another layer, and what is stored gonna be like the reference to other table instead of the actual data?
Okay, so I think we can take a look at how we can create views. So here on the right side, here you let's not look at create a view, just look at the content of the view. It's actually simple select query. So what you are asking is the tables, it can be the normal table, like you have a stable table and you are referencing in this view. And this is how we create a view. Does that answer your question?
Oh, yeah, yes, thank you.
Okay. So it's just like a SQL query that you want to put it there instead of giving people direct data, because the data is changing and the table is a stable table. But when you hand over a SQL query to people, then when they execute it, it's the new data. So that's the difference. Okay, so get back to our schedule. So
Shi,
another thing,
can I add a comment?
yeah.
Yeah, so I thought your explanation was very good. I'll add another wrinkle to the use case. So if you create this daily census query, and then just something happens where underlying the hospital has to go and do something different or whatever, you know, and let's just say, I don't know, patients used to just have a first name and a last name, and now they decide they want to have a middle name also because they ran into sometimes problem people have the same first name and last name, whatever. You can say, well, you know, the first field that's the field that's called name, I'm now going to concatenate the middle name and change the code in your view. But the people who are using the view don't even need to know that you changed the code. They're just going to get the benefit that name now is going to be first space, middle space, last instead of first space, last, right? So it's a nice thing where if you have all these different people using your daily census view, then when you change that view in one place, they all benefit from the changes you make.
Yeah. Thank you for adding that. Yes, that's the benefit when you reuse and you have only one place to change when you need to do the modification. Okay, so the rules and restrictions for views, since we treat it as table, like when we later you can see how we use views, we treat it as table. So it has to be uniquely named so that the database know which table are you referring to. And then because it's an advanced function, so you have to have access to that. Sometimes the DBA don't assign those access to beginners. And thirdly, views can be nested. So you can think of it as tables. You can nested tables, like you can select from one table, join to table 2, and then have a condition on another table. So that's how nested here mean. Lastly, views cannot be indexed. So from what I understand, database have this function that when you have a SQL query, the database will go ahead and index it so that next time when they run it, they know that they know how to improve the performance. But the views, they cannot be indexed. So database cannot improve performance on this part. So it's advanced topic. So it's okay to not understand it. Okay, let's get to understand how to use views. So previously we have been looking at this example for how to create views. You can see, except from the first line, create view, it's just looking at a normal select query. You have your select fields from tables, and you have where clause. And then on top of that, you put create a view, your view name as, then you have a view. It's very easy. You can also filter views, use where clause. You can reform the fields however you want. It's quite easy to understand. Lastly, you can do the calculation on the fields whatever you want. So here, this is another example. You have your select fields that already exist in the table, and then you create a new column that is calculated from the existing columns. Any question so far? Okay. Okay, that's lesson 18. We are now looking at lesson 19, working with store procedure. Okay, it's another advanced topic. So what is store procedure? It's a collection of one or more SQL statements. The problem is, when will you think of using store procedures? I think the store procedure like programs. I will think of using store procedures when I have this very complex logic that, for example, a for loop. How do you do for loop in SQL statement? It's maybe it's doable, but it takes some time and takes some search in Google. But store procedure can do that. What about having create a table and update a table and having another table depending on the output of the previous table, and you have a lot of process to do for your logic, and you have this whole thing within a SQL unit. That's how we call a store procedure. So you have everything for this solution of the problem inside a one unit, and that's store procedure. If you have any experience with any programming language like Java, Python, you can think of store procedure like a simplified program. So it can do complex logic within SQL. So as I have said, when you have a complex logic, you may think of using store procedure. And another benefit is because we have a store procedure and you have wrapped all your complex logic in a store procedure, you can share the procedure with others, or you may use it every time you want to have this result. For example, still the daily census. I can wrap the calculation of daily census into a store procedure so that within my very, very long SQL statement, I can just call this store procedure and get the result of daily census. That's one use of a store procedure. Another scenario is when you have a logic that depends on the input. So for example, okay, I have reporting that I want to know what's the monthly result, that may be the simplified, what's the quarterly result, what's the 1 year result, what's the 4 years result. That's all the different input you have. Instead of writing the code again and again, copy and paste 5 or 6 times, when it scales up, it's not actually a good practice to copy and paste your code everywhere. So you can do is wrap your logic within a store procedure and have an input as a variable. And inside the store procedure, you can do the calculation depending on the input. Then every time when you need to do monthly, quarterly, 1 year, 4 year, 6 year, 10 year, you just change the input and run the store procedure, just one line, and solve your problem. Okay. Here, we also have some examples how to use store procedure. First, execute a store procedure. It's easy as one line. Here, this example has input variables. You can see you just input the variables within the brackets and run the program one line. That's it. And secondly, creating a store procedure. So here, we can start looking at the store procedure from between begin and end. The core of the store procedure is between the begin and end. And here it's just simple as select something from the table where the where statement stands. And the fields is the output of this store procedure. And you just define the output variable at the beginning of the store procedure. Here is the example of a store procedure. And when you want to execute it, you first define the variable and put the return value inside of the brackets and select the return value. So that's one way to do it. Of course, it's a very simplified store procedure example. In reality, you can make a very complicated, as I said, I have created a for loop inside of store procedure. It's quite difficult to debug, but it's doable. Yeah, any question here? Is it too difficult to understand? So no question?
I
thought so.
have a,
Yeah, go
sorry,
ahead.
I just have a quick question. I missed just a little bit of the last slide. So the benefit of a stored procedure, is it faster? When you say the performance?
I haven't compared it. It's stated by the book.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel when it executes, it's the same time when you put all the SQL statements onto a simple SQL query, but just run it one by one. If you have a very long query, let's say the example I made, you have monthly, quarterly, 1 year, 4 year, 6 year, 10 year. And if you put it in a simple SQL query way, then you have to manually run it one after one after one, like 6 times.
Okay.
Yeah, so I can make a quick comment on that in terms of performance. I don't remember if the book explains this very well, but more advanced vendors, what they will do. I know Microsoft SQL Server does this, and that's just the system I know really well. I'm not necessarily promoting it. When you run any query, the database says, okay, this is the data you want. These are the rows and columns that you want. You've given me the instructions for what you want. I now need to go and figure out how I'm going to do it. Usually it only takes it a fraction of a second. So like 1/10 of a second, 2/10 of a second to analyze a few different options and decide on what it's going to do. However, typically with stored procedures, what it'll do is it'll save that action plan when it runs the stored procedure. So then the second time you call it, it doesn't even need to spend that little fraction of a second figuring it out. It just reuses the plan from the last time it ran it. So for small little stored procedures, that can save you, if it's a quickie little thing and it takes less than 1/10 of a second to run, adding 2/10 of a second to figure out what to do, it isn't necessarily a very good bargain. But if you have a long running query that's 30 seconds, you're not going to notice the difference between whether it needed to figure it out or whether it, already had the plan saved off in a cache somewhere.
So after the first run, subsequent ones would then be faster, basically.
A tiny bit faster, yes.
Okay.
Yes. Ultimately, like getting the data, doing the select, it can't do that any faster, but it just saves a little bit of overhead.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can share another example. So a company I worked at, we actually decided that we wanted the database to control all access to the data. So in all of the reports, the report writers never put SQL code in the reports. Okay, it's very common. If you look, you'll see the report says select blah, 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 blah. And that was not the convention we used. So what would happen is every report would have a unique stored procedure associated with it that would get all of the data for that. And that stored procedure would say select da da da. And the report would simply say run stored procedure such and such, and then with whatever parameters. So if you said, I picked, what state, what city, whatever your criteria is. Typically reports have like filters and things, right? So you could specify all the filters. And they were just parameters into the stored procedure, and the stored procedure would insert those parameters into the where clause, basically. So, so that was just, a way of, to a limited extent, it could be reuse of code, because you could reuse the stored procedure in multiple places if you wanted the same data. But mostly it was just because we, it's very difficult when you copy and paste SQL code queries all over the place. And so by keeping everything in stored procedures that were all stored on the server, that kind of, that just helped us, manage things and keep things nice and tight.
I have a quick question. So if you save a query, is a separate file, is it also referred to a stored procedure, or stored procedure has to live on the server itself? Because
You okay. So when you save a SQL query, it's I use Oracle SQL Server, so it appears to me you have a file and with the .SQL extension as a file. It's a SQL query. While while when you have a stored procedure, in our database management software, you will find on the left side of your tree, you will have procedures. Under the procedure, you will have a list of all the stored procedures, and it can be seen within the organization. So it's the part of you can share your stored procedure with your colleagues, instead of when you save a SQL query, it's on your local machine. It's not shareable. Does that answer your question?
I guess in a way, yes. It's just at my work we use I guess we have our files, our work projects saved on GitHub, and then we
Okay. I will try to answer it in another way. So when you have a stored procedure, your colleagues can just execute the stored procedure name and open brackets, close brackets. They can execute the stored procedures anywhere they want. When you have a SQL query, it has, I don't know how you can execute a file on another.
I guess I'm understanding it's not going to be considered stored procedures because
it's not considered stored procedure. Yeah,
we call it with Python SDK to.
It's managed. The stored procedure is managed by the database.
Okay, I see. Yes, okay, thank you for clarifying that. I always thought those were called stored procedures. But
no, you have to follow the format of a stored procedure. Like you have to have this create procedure name and then a list of variables and then begin and end of procedure. That's the format of a stored procedure. You have to follow it.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, if I could jump in, I think that's a really good question. So I don't think having a text file on GitHub versus a stored procedure stored internally inside the database system, I don't think one of them is inherently better than the other, but it does mean, you know, what she was saying is that if it's stored in the database, then the database manages the security on that stored procedure and all that kind of stuff. And people can run the stored procedure without even having to know what the code is that's inside of it. And if you have any code inside of it that you want to be sort of hidden, then that's possible. If you just store it as a plain file, you can also assign permissions to those files and who's allowed to read it and not and whatever. And so I don't think one's necessarily better than the other, but certainly you can never hide the details of what's happening inside of a file that's in GitHub. I will share also that I have used, just like you write functions in Python or some other programming languages, I have had routines that are complex enough that we have helper stored procedures. So, for example, we had some very complex logic that was identifying certain patients. And so sometimes we'd have like a list of medications. And so there was a helper stored procedure that says, return all the patients who in the last year have taken one of these medications. And so if you wanted to know like the people who've taken both medication A and medication B, you don't have to write that code twice. You just say call helper stored procedure and you get back, you know, the results for drug A. And then you call the same stored procedure, helper stored procedure, you get the for drug B, and then you do whatever your logic is where you join those two together to see who are the common patients and all that kind of thing, right? So it's not that common, but in more complex systems, you may actually have helper stored procedures and you can sort of reuse that code. Not as easy to do that with just like plain text files, you know, .SQL files that you have stored on a file system or GitHub or something like that.
Okay, but those .txt files, the ones that live on GitHub, are they still called stored procedures? I can call them that, or no? No,
you should not use that term. If it's just
Okay.
select this, select that is what's in your text file, then
Okay.
we would call that a SQL script, where it's
Okay.
just running a bunch of SQL commands. As she said, only if what you see on the screen where you say create procedure, begin, blah, 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 end, that's a stored procedure. And that means you're storing it in the database. And depending on permissions, you're making it available to everyone who uses the database.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, that was a good question.
I guess that's the end of my presentation. Again, I just want to emphasize that these two topics are quite advanced, so it may not be usable to SQL beginners, but just remember their existence. So one day in the future, when you think of when you have a difficult problem that you may think of them, and it's easier that you can solve the problem within SQL, that you don't need to transform the data outside and then transform back to inside back to the SQL database. So that's the benefit of SQL. Yeah, thank you. Any question?
If we can, we don't have to necessarily go over the problem, but I just had trouble with the challenge number 1 in chapter 8 in the views chapter. And I don't know if you tried it, but it's kind of frustrating because the author, when he goes over joins, he he gives you the right way or the preferred way to do joins, and then he doesn't do it in practice in the book. And so it's kind of frustrating. But this is challenge 1, where I don't know if anyone was able to get that correctly.
I didn't look at the challenger, but
Okay. Yeah,
do
no
you
problem.
mind if you want to share the code that you
Oh,
have?
yeah. Yeah, can I share?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and do that? I took a quick peek at what you posted in the chat, Harold, and it looked okay to me.
Okay.
The only thing I wasn't sure is that you have a second statement there, the select, and
Oh, yeah.
and you might, it's okay to have 2, but you might not want to run them all at once. You might want to just run the create and then separately run the select.
Okay.
Sometimes database systems are a little finicky if you put 2 things together. I can't think of a reason why, but I'm just letting you know that.
Okay. So can you see my post GRES SQL?
So what you have on your screen, there is no semicolon at the end of the create view.
Okay.
It just goes create view and then it goes immediately into select. So I would delete line 183. I would just run from 172 to 182, and that looks like it should work.
Okay, let me try it.
Oh, you also have an extra comma in your select list. Python allows it, but SQL is old and it doesn't allow the extra comma after the last thing. So right before from, you've got an extra comma on the line above.
Oh, okay.
And that's probably the main problem you had. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's probably it. It's
Okay.
annoying, but it's an old language.
Yeah, and I don't know if you noticed how he uses the at least in that chapter, he used, the author did the non-preferred way to do joins.
Yeah.
And I don't know, Z, maybe you can speak a little bit if to you know, your practice and how you do your joins.
Are you referring to use join instead of specify what kind of join?
Yeah. So the old way that was before the new ANSI standard, you could say select blah 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 from table 1, comma table 2. And then the ANSI way is you would say from table 1 inner join table 2
Right.
on
Yes.
blah blah.
Yes.
So Harold's asking if you always use join and on, or if you sometimes just say from table 1, comma table 2.
Okay, I can only speak to my experience and our working environment. So we usually do very straightforward, like universally understood way. So we like to use select fields from table 1, inner join table 2 on table 1 dot field equal to table 2 dot field. So we would like to specify everything that make no will not make any misunderstanding to any other colleagues, because as analyst, you may assign to our old story that you need to make modification. It's disaster that when you look at the script, all the scripts like very hard to debug. It's easier that everything is specified, even though sometimes for some table, when you join with table, select from table 1 in the join with table 2, sometimes the fields only exist in table 1. So you can get away without specifying table 1 dot field. You can do it just the fields without specifying table 1, but it's easier to understand when you specify its table 1 dot field.
Yeah, I think that's great advice.
Thank you. Yeah. it helps to see the word join in the code, to realize you're actually looking at a join.
I can tell you also, like, I sometimes have where clauses that are 10 lines long. And if you mix in there the reason that's supposed to join the two tables together, it just makes it hard to find. Whereas if you have on, then it's very clear which of your criteria is to join the tables together and which is to filter your rows to reduce the amount of data that you get. So I just think, yeah, there's a reason why it's the new ANSI standard and the way you're supposed to do it.
Yeah.
Someday, Oracle, Microsoft, they'll stop allowing you to do it the old way, but I guess they're worried that it'll break code. So I think you can still get away with doing it the other way. All right. Thanks, Shi. I really liked your explanations. I thought it was very clear.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
All right. So if some of you need to go, that's fine. I'm going to take the last few minutes since we scheduled an hour. Last time we introduced this particular problem on Strata Scratch, and I also have a couple other things that I thought about asking you guys about. So this is a problem that I'm pretty sure you can do with just the stuff that we've talked about. So it says, find the average total compensation based on employee titles and gender. So basically, they want you to return one row for each title gender combination, right? But they make it tricky. They say total compensation is calculated by adding both the salary and the bonus of each employee. However, the salary is stored in one table and the bonus is stored in another table, and not every employee receives a bonus. And so to make it even trickier, they say they don't want the people with no bonuses, but let's not even worry about that right now. So somehow you have a salary here in the employee table, okay? And you're going to need to join this to the bonus table, and there could be multiple rows in the bonus table. So a really lucky employee might have 3 bonuses, all right? So before we try and do exactly the full problem here, let's just talk a little bit about how would you calculate the total compensation for each employee. So you somehow need to add this salary with multiple bonuses. Has anybody looked at this problem, or anybody have any ideas from just looking at it right now? So
Just thoughts off the top of my head. We'd want everything from the bonus table, right? Because there can be multiple for the bonus.
mm-hmm.
So in that case, wouldn't it be, can we assume that for the employees table, each employee is only once in the employees table?
Sure, let's do that. Let's make it a little bit simpler. Weird column name. All right, can I do this? Can I run this code? All right, yeah. All right, so this, what I have here is just joining these two tables together. Okay, you see, do I need to make the font a little bigger? Would that help?
I can see it fine.
So I've joined employee with bonus. As is, this query is not going to get me obviously the total compensation for each employee. So if you look at individual rows, let me see if I can find someone. All right, let me just say order by employee. Maybe that'll help. So you can see Alan Wang, lucky guy, got 2 bonuses. Let me scroll to the right here. So, doesn't fit on my screen. So he got a bonus of 5,000 and he got a bonus of 4,500. So what we need to calculate is 5,000 plus 4,500 plus his salary, which is 200,000. Okay. So if so one thing is we're probably going to group this by employee. Does that make sense? So if I say I don't know, what's that field called? Bonus? Bonus. All right. So I'm going to say that there's something wrong with this code that I wrote. All right. So this first guy, Alan, you see it says 409,500. So if you remember, his salary was 200,000 and he had a bonus of 4,500 and a bonus of 5,000. So the total should have been 209,500, but I got 409,500. Does anybody understand what went wrong here?
Was salary counted twice?
Yeah. So when I do this inner join, that's great. Thank you. So when I do this inner join and I get 2 rows because this employee has 2 bonuses, then there's a salary on every row and there's a bonus on every row. But when you join a table with fewer rows to a table with more rows, in this case, 1 employee, 2 bonuses, everything from the table with fewer rows gets copied multiple times. So we cannot do this sum salary here. Okay. And if I just did it and if I did something like this, sum salary, didn't work. Plus bonus, I'm going to get the exact same wrong answer. Okay. Because the problem is that I have 2 rows with salary. And so for person ID 1, I'm still going to get 409,500. So does anyone have a suggestion how to fix this one part just to get the total compensation? We haven't even really done the whole rest of this yet.
Can we use the distinct keyword to get?
Distinct. That's interesting. So you might be able to get away with that. I would not recommend that. So one problem with distinct is if you had multiple bonuses that were the same amount, then distinct would get rid of one of them because it would see that it's like a duplicate or whatever.
Oh no,
right?
I mean for the salary.
Yes, but the idea is right. So the salary is going to be the same on every row. So I think this would work, but I don't recommend this because I think this is unintuitive. Okay.
What if we group, if we add salary to the group by? Would it work?
Yes. So two solutions that come to mind are, you could change this to something like max. They're all identical. So max or min, either of them is just going to give you the unique salary. Okay. I don't know if this is like perfectly intuitive, but I think this is better than doing sum distinct. I never use I never use sum distinct. I think that's just kind of a weird thing personally. So if you do this, then you'll get one number for salary and it will be just the 200,000 for that guy. But this one is going to sum all the rows together. And so if I run this quickly, then you can just see I get 209 for employee ID 1. But the other suggestion was we can group by salary. And then that means we want only one of these. And so now if I run this code, you will see the salary is 200,000 and the bonus is 9,500. It's exactly what we want. I'm just going to replace this comma with a plus. I don't think it's going to yell at me. It's a little bit weird to see this is an aggregate function, this is not, but I don't see any reason why we can't do that. And then voila, we have 209.
But which one would be more efficient to run? Runtime?
Push come to shove, just since you asked, I think that the max, they'll either be the same, but if they're different, I think the max might run a little bit faster. Okay. So group by tends to be an expensive operation because group by, what the server has to do is it has to sort all the rows. And then it's looking to see whether the adjacent rows have the same value or not. So grouping by more things can be kind of expensive. Looping over and calculating an aggregate is a little bit on the expensive side, but we are already looping over to calculate the sum. So if we loop over to calculate a max, then it shouldn't add to the number of loops. It should just be smart enough to combine those loops at the same time. But that would be a very advanced question, so I'm not personally too worried about it. I would think I would accept either of these as pretty good solutions. All right. So if you can write this query, then basically you can build on this in order to do the bigger question, which is like, oh, now that I have employee ID and total comp, then I'm going to use this basically as my starting table to say what is the average total compensation by title and gender. And so so then basically what I would typically do is I would have this, and then I'm writing a query that's of the form select title, gender, what does it want? Average total comp? Average total comp from, and then basically I'm selecting it from something like this. Okay, I have to add title and gender. I don't have title and gender in here. So I'm gonna have to tweak it a little bit to add title and gender to the group by and return all of those. And then if I do that, then I can basically select all of those and put this thing inside parentheses. I showed this trick last week. It's not in the book, but subqueries, The only ways they showed it in the book is you can either use it in the select list or you can use it in the where clause. But the other way you can use it is you can use it in the from as a separate table. And so if I call this whole subquery Q, then I could say Q.title. Q.gender. Okay. Group by Q.title. Q.gender. And then I do have to also add in here gender. And technically, I don't need the order by because it's a subquery. All right, I went pretty fast at the end here, but because we're over time. But any questions about this? Either the first step just to get the total comp, or now, using that as a sort of a temporary working table that I'm going to select from in order to just, this is a pretty typical thing where you just group by 2 columns and you calculate an average.
When would you recommend using a view versus a nested query?
In an interview question, you're basically never going to use a view. How's that as a simple answer?
Okay.
You're going to use a view because, you want to reuse code, because you want to do security, because you want to do things that, like, it's just not going to come up in an interview question.
Okay.
So the problem also asks to also disregard employees who don't receive bonus. So we have to put a where as well.
So I did not mention that. It just so happens that in this inner query, in the subquery, I did an inner join on bonus. And so everyone who didn't get a bonus got those rows from employee got eliminated already. So I lucked out.
Okay, I see.
Does that make sense? Now, what if the question had said the opposite? It said, I have to include people who didn't get any bonuses. Okay. Then what I would do is I would change this to a left join. Okay. Then I'm going to get every row in employee, regardless of whether they have any bonuses or not. And I also need to do something else if I wanted to do that, because now it's possible that this bonus value will be null. And so I don't know the syntax in other flavors of other vendors, but for Microsoft SQL Server, there's a function called isNull. And so if the bonus is null, I can say, what's happening? Why can't I type on this? If it's null, then add 0 to the salary. If I don't do this, then what's going to happen is this salary is going to get turned into null. So that would be the other way if we wanted to. But it so happened I lucked out that I already wrote an inner join, and so I happened to follow this instruction, but just by luck. Any other questions? All right, we're past time. I didn't find another great problem online, so I just came up with my own. So if you assume that you have, like in the book, it's got this example of you have orders and you have order items, okay? And there could be multiple items on an order, okay? how would you write a query to tell you which orders did not include item X? All right, and I'm just going to tell you right now that if you just do order table, left join, item table, where item does not equal X, that's not going to give you the answer. That's going to give you every item other than X that was ever ordered. But I'm saying, no, the order could have had 5 things, and one of them was X, and I don't want you to include that order or any of its items. I just want to know the orders where, even though there's multiple things, X did not appear in any of the items on that order. So I'll try and write it up a little bit prettier and then put it in the Slack so that you guys have a reference for next week. But then that'll be the solution that I go over next week. Okay, how could you find all the orders where none of the items were X? Any questions about that? All right, cool. Well, I hope you guys found tonight useful. So we will be meeting again next week, which is what, the 15th. And then we'll be off for 2 weeks after that before we pick up again in December.
Oh, I have a question.
Yeah, please.
Why?
Oh, actually, hold on one sec. I'm going to stop the recording here and then we can continue.